Hey, what's up? It's Jared. Welcome to State of Tech, and today we are going to talk about the 10 reasons why you would choose an iPhone over Android in 2019. Now, I just got done publishing my flip side of this topic, which is some reasons why you might choose Android in 2019. Android's in an interesting place right now because there are a lot of really interesting device and device upgrades coming out this year. But for those of us that tend to like tried and true, the iPhone has definitely shown itself to be that. The Apple has not really rocked the boat much lately with features or big, huge announcements or anything like that. But what is consistent is the reliability of an iPhone and how it just always works. And we tend to have maybe less frustrations in some different areas on an iPhone than some people might experience on Android. Now, some people might say the flip side of that. I think it really is kind of a personal experience. It's what you experience. It's the way you use your device. So even your opinions on some of these things are going to be different than mine. But that's what's the great thing about sharing our thoughts and stuff like that online, is that we can talk about our own perspectives and then also learn from others. So are you already an Android user or are you an iPhone user? If you're an iPhone user, in the comment section below, put iPhone and say I'm never changing if you're never going to change. And if you're an Android user thinking about switching to iPhone, type the word Android and put it down in the comment section. If you're listening on the podcast, you can head on over to the show notes, which is linked down below, and then you can participate in the comment section there as well. So let's jump right into my 10 reasons why I think you might want to choose an iPhone in 2019 over Android. Some of these are going to be obvious, but I'm going to give my own personal take on some of these, and hopefully there will be a few that stand out to you as something interesting. So of course, the first is iMessage. iMessage has always been great. Apple has had iMessage for a long time. It's cross-device, so whether you're on an iPhone, an iPad, or your Mac, it makes it really easy for you to send text messages to people, whether they're on an iPhone or not. It's just a great way to live in that world. Now, an app called iMESSAGE has came out for Android, and with a little bit of a workaround, you can actually use iMessage technically on an Android device now. But it's a little bit of a challenging process. I'm actually in the process of getting that set up, and as soon as I have a little bit of time to test it, I'm going to share my thoughts with all of you who, like me, you may have an Android phone, or maybe your preference is an Android phone, but you want to use iMessage because you send and receive photos and all the different stuff, and you like using that iMessage experience with other people in your family. I know for a lot of people, using iMessage or having an iPhone, they make that choice because they really like iMessage and the rest of their family uses Apple products. So for that, that may change. I'm going to bring my thoughts to you when I have an opportunity to play with iMessage a little bit. So number 2 is AirDrop. AirDrop is fantastic, and I have found a workaround for when I'm on a Windows PC or I'm on an Android device, and maybe I have my iPhone and I want to share images outside of the Apple ecosystem. I figured out a way to do it. It's not the best way to do it, but it definitely is almost as fast as AirDrop. But AirDrop is amazing if you're on an iPhone and you want to share files, whether they be photos, videos, documents, whatever, between your different Apple devices or to other people who also have Apple devices. AirDrop is just hands down a fantastic platform, and sending and receiving photos and documents and video files and stuff like that between each other is just a great overall experience. And even though you can do that, and I have a video coming out on that, I'm talking about using the Send Anywhere app, which is fantastic. It's an extra step, but it's also cross-platform, so it works out really well. But AirDrop is just a super clean process for sending images, videos, and whatnot between each other. I'm always sending photos from my iPhone to my wife's iPhone. I'm always sending photos to my iPad, maybe if I want a little bit bigger of a screen to edit on. It's just a great process. And then even if I need to go to my laptop, I can quickly send a photo that I just took from my phone to my laptop, edit it, and then send it back. Or of course, there's iCloud as well if I want to wait for the transfer process to take place. But AirDrop has just been a great experience, and I think it's a feature that I absolutely miss every time I switch to a different platform. Number 3 is the cameras. Now, the cameras on iPhones have always been good. You know that the cameras are going to be good on an iPhone. You don't have to worry about that. With Android phones, a lot of them have really great cameras, and I would even say that the Pixel 3 XL camera or the Pixel 3 camera is better in a lot of ways than the iPhone camera. But the iPhone camera is super consistent and it works every time. So even though Android has caught up in the realm of cameras, the iPhone, the camera launches super fast. You could switch between the modes super fast. There's no lagginess. A lot of other phones, a lot of Android phones, have a little bit of lag when it comes to trying to take photos really fast, switching between camera modes, getting in and out of the camera, and stuff like that. And I have never had that experience on an iPhone because the iPhone camera is just fast and it works every single time. I personally find myself taking more photos and more videos when I'm on an iPhone than when I'm on Android. And I really don't know why, because my Pixel 3 has a way better, in my opinion, well, not way better, but it has a better camera than the iPhone. And so if I want a really good quality image, especially in lower light situations, I typically would go and grab my Pixel 3. But when I have my iPhone, for some reason, I just am always taking pictures. And I think it's because it's so much easier to get in and out of the camera. And the camera just seems to be a little bit faster than some of the Android phones that I have experience with. So number 4 is app support, and that's been a issue since the very beginning. There's just more apps readily available for iPhone than there is for Android. There are a lot of apps available for Android, so that gap has never been smaller. But the problem is that there's still a gap there. Sometimes new features come to apps for iOS before they come to Android, and that can be kind of frustrating depending on the type of apps that you use. Now, there's a lot of games and different apps that are cross-platform, and these days, a lot of the developers are releasing these apps for both the iPhone and Android at the same time, so that issue isn't necessarily as big of a deal as it has been in the past. But there are still apps for services that I use, like business services and whatnot, and the app comes to iPhone before it comes to Android. And so a lot of times, I mean, that's frustrating. I want to be using my Android phone. Like, for example, next week, I will receive my Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, the big one. I'm super excited to use that phone, but there's one app that I've been using constantly for business, and it's not available on Android yet, which is kind of frustrating. So there's still that issue of app support not fully being, an equal playing field or an equal results when it comes to whether or not apps exist on both platforms. If that's not so much an issue for you, then maybe it's not. But for me, it does occasionally become an issue. I know that apps these days look great and perform great on both platforms. So that kind of gap isn't as big of a deal as it used to be. Whereas the iOS apps always looked good and ran good, and Android apps looked kind of like they were forgotten about. That gap is totally gone. Developers are making beautiful apps for both platforms. It's just sometimes you end up getting more options available for iOS than you do on Android. Number 5 is hands down accessories. The iPhone has all the accessories. If you want any cases, like a large variety of cases or devices you can connect to your phone or pretty much anything, iPhone always kind of has that down. There's just so many options out there. You go to your local Best Buy or electronics store, there's aisles of stuff for iPhones and iPads, and there's an aisle for all of the Android phones that are out. And while some Android phones have more accessories than others, for example, a lot of the Samsung phones get plenty of case options and different stuff like that, it's nowhere near the amount of stuff that's available for the iPhone, which is kind of unfortunate. But, and to be honest, not a lot of us go and buy tons of stuff for our phones. It may be a case, maybe a skin or something like that. And the gap is definitely closing, considering that pretty much all Android phones these days have USB-C. They use the same connection. Of course, the iPhone is still using its Lightning connection, and maybe it changes this year. We're not sure, but there still are just a ton of accessories and a ton of things for the iPhone because there's only a couple of iPhones, whereas there's tons of Android phones in all different shapes and sizes, and it's hard for manufacturers to come out with cases and accessories and stuff for all of those different Android phones when all they have to do is focus on just a few iPhones. So there's a lot of good stuff out there for iPhones, a lot of stuff too for Androids, but not nearly the amount of stuff that's available for iPhones. I'll link to some of my favorite accessories for my iPhone down below. Number 6 is device support. So this is really important for those of you that want to buy a phone and actually hang on to it for a number of years. If you want software updates and you want your device to continue to be supported by the manufacturer, Apple is one of the leaders in that. Right now with iOS version 12, there's support all the way down to the iPhone 5S, which is a very old phone. For anybody who's still running an iPhone 5S, the phone is small compared to today's phones, and it is probably a little bit slow, but nonetheless, it's still a phone that works. And for a lot of people, they don't need more than that iPhone 5S, and so they hate to buy a new version of a phone just simply because the manufacturer's not supporting it anymore. So for those people that want to hang on to a phone for 5 years or so, Apple kind of gives you that ability because they're supporting the iPhone 5S got this year's last year's software update. And it might not get this year's software update, but the iPhone 6 certainly will. And so that's a long time of supporting the devices. Whereas with a lot of Android phones, they might support the last couple of years and then they cut that off. And with each manufacturer, it's different. But with most of the phones that come out on Android, you're going to get software updates for maybe 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 if you're lucky, and then that's it. They've moved on, and you're not going to get the latest version either on some of those. You might only get the latest version of the software for 1 or 2 years of that device, and then after that, you're kind of stuck at that, that version, and you're not going to get future versions. You might still get security updates and stuff like that, but you don't get the latest versions of the software. So that's the exciting thing about being on iOS, is that you're always going to get those latest versions. I know Google is doing that a little bit with the Pixel phones. They're giving you software updates for quite a few years, but that's only one out of many Android phone manufacturers that are giving you many years back devices, the latest versions of the software updates. So that might be important to you, especially if you keep devices for a little while and you want to make sure that you're getting the latest software updates. Number 7 is the wearables. Of course, with the Apple Watch, which I'm wearing right here, the Apple Watch is one of the only watch wearables right now that's really kind of pushing things forward. Android is kind of in this weird place right now. They changed the Android Wear name to Wear OS by Google to be kind of cross-platform. And since they made that change, there hasn't been really any innovation or any updates or changes there. There haven't been any milestone updates in the software itself. So Wear OS is kind of at this stalemate right now where things aren't really moving. There's talk that Google's going to come out with a Pixel Watch. There's talk about things that may or may not happen. And it'll be interesting to see what happens at Google I/O this year. But Apple continues to push forward with development on the Apple Watch, giving it new features that get people excited. I know I wasn't really excited about Apple Watch these last couple of years until they added in the expanded the heart rate, monitor, of course, has gotten better, and also the ECG feature, which I thought was really cool. Some think it's a little gimmicky, but the data's starting to come out that it is actually a pretty useful feature, and I think it's really interesting, and it's giving us a vision of what can happen with a device like this. And Apple is doing that, and it's cool to see all of that happening on a platform. Whereas Wear OS by Google right now kind of isn't doing much. It's not to say that they can't, because what is exciting about Wear OS is that there are a lot of different watch options, a lot of different designs and styles, and a lot of those watches look like a typical watch. They don't look like an Apple Watch, so they blend in a little bit better. But the features aren't really there, and the software isn't that great these days. A lot of the watches are cheaper, which is good, so the barrier to entry is a lot lower. But if you want that latest and greatest, you're definitely going to get that on an Apple Watch and not necessarily on Wear OS right now. So that's another reason to choose Apple and choose an iPhone over Android. Of course, you can use a Wear OS by Google watch on an iPhone, which is exciting. I've done that. I have a couple of videos over the years where I've tested that and just to see what that experience is like. I actually have a new video coming out soon on the TicWatch S2, which is a $150 smartwatch that does, I'd say, probably 70% of what an Apple Watch does. And of course, it's a fraction of the price. So if you're interested in that, check that out. Know that you're not stuck to an Apple Watch. However, in my opinion, I think Apple is the only one really doing anything cool with wearable watches right now. And that's why it's a reason that I think you would want to stick with Apple over moving to Android. Number 8 is the consistent experience. Now, the experience of an iPhone hasn't really changed much over the years. The apps, the way that the apps are organized and everything on the screen is basically the same as it's been ever since the beginning. There's something to be said about there being a consistent experience, especially if you are a user of these devices and you don't like things changing and being completely different from version to version. If you are adverse to that kind of change, an iPhone is always going to be expected. You know what to expect every time you go and get a new iPhone. You go and get a version that has a new software update on it or something like that, or they come out with a new version. It is very consistent and you know what to expect. Of course, a couple years ago when they went with the buttonless face on the phone and the Face ID, that changed things a little bit. The swipe gestures were something to get used to, but the overall experience of the entire phone has always been pretty close to the same, and that feels good for a lot of us that don't want change. With Android, a lot of times the experience is going to be different from manufacturer to manufacturer, and then sometimes there's some big changes in different versions of Android that changes the overall experience, which is a lot of fun, but for those of you that don't want those updates to be something you're going to have to learn how to use your phone all over again, that might be a frustration. Number 9 is the battery life. The battery life on an iPhone has always been great. Android used to struggle big time with battery life, and you had to just get a phone with a giant battery to even get the phone to last all day. But Android's gotten better and better, so that kind of line has blurred a bit. But the iPhone still is a fantastic phone when it comes to battery life. My iPhone XS Max lasts all day easily and well into the next day. And when they came out with the extended battery pack, I went ahead and purchased that. And I was getting 2.5 to 3 days of battery life out of my phone, which is insane. Yes, it adds some thickness to the phone, but you can't get that kind of battery life out of an Android phone without plugging something into it or getting maybe a big battery case for it. Android has gotten better, like I said, but iPhone has always had consistent battery life. They've done a good job at making sure the software doesn't allow apps to become a hog and stuff like that. It's been just an overall good experience, and so the battery lasts a lot longer because of the way that the software is optimized and the device itself is optimized. So battery life typically is better, although some of the Android devices are getting really good, with the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, the big version, having a pretty large battery. I'm kind of excited to see how that lasts this year. But if I was to put my Pixel 3 XL up against my iPhone XS Max, the iPhone X's battery life is going to last a bit longer than the Pixel. The Pixel does seem to drain the battery a little bit faster than my iPhone. And that's just been my overall experience over the years, is that if I want a phone that's going to last me a long time on a charge, so long as I'm being average with how I'm using it, maybe closing out apps when I'm done, I can get a ton of use out of an iPhone over an Android, which I may end up having to charge at the end of the day. Number 10 is the Apple Home app experience. Now, Google Home is really good, and it has Google Assistant, and there's a lot of really good features there. And I think if I had to choose an assistant, it would definitely be Google Assistant over Siri. But the Apple Home app is really nice and clean and easy to use. It focuses more on a graphical user interface that makes it easy to turn on and off your lights and change any of those settings or things that are going on in your home. I also want to include the Apple TV in that, because the connection of your iPhone or your iPad to the Apple TV and being able to put something up on the TV, and all of that experience is super clean, and it always has been, whereas a lot of the other devices sometimes are slow or laggy, disconnect and whatnot. Apple Home has just been a great experience for me. And I don't have a Siri smart speaker or whatever they're called, HomePod in my home, because I'm not a fan of Siri, but I'm always using the Apple Home app to control the lights. Being able to access that and control them on my watch and turn lights on and off is just a great experience. I'm not one for having to talk to a device and then have it ask me questions and repeat what I said back to me. I just want to toggle things on and off really quickly, and Apple Home makes that possible. So whether you're on your iPhone or an Apple Watch, it's a great experience for controlling those smart devices in your home. Of course, I wish that you can integrate Google Assistant with that more easily, but we're stuck with Siri, and Siri is getting better. I'm not gonna knock Siri for trying, because Siri is definitely getting much better. But I think the Apple Home app is still just one of the better overall experiences. So notice that I didn't say anything about price. Price is not an Apple thing. Apple tends to be the leader in having the higher price, and definitely over the last couple of years, Apple has been increasing the price of those phones and their different devices, because there hasn't been a whole lot of price increase over the last several years. So that's happening, and that's also driving other manufacturers to increase their pricing as well, which is kind of a bummer, but it just is what it is. What Apple did do is they released the iPhone XR, which I think is an amazing phone. I think the XR is great. I got one for my wife, and sometimes I see her phone and I'm like, that's just a nice phone. The size of the phone is nice. Pictures that she takes look great. I've played with the phone a bit and just really enjoy it. So I think it's a great all-around phone, and the price is great on it as well. But then they also have the higher-end phones, the XS, the XS Max, and all that stuff, and those are good phones too. They're just a little bit higher priced. So I didn't mention price because Android phones are getting there in the higher price too. The iPhone, of course, Apple was the leader in moving the prices up, but Android's following suit as well, and all of our phones are going to be just a little bit more expensive this year than they were last year, and that's just the nature of where things are in the marketplace right now. So let me know what you think. Share your thoughts down in the comment section below. If you're watching this on YouTube, links are right down below. I'm sharing some of the links that I mentioned earlier, including some of the devices that I use and have as well. If you're listening on the podcast, make sure to check out the show notes. The link is down below, and you can see all of that good stuff that I shared, including some images and whatnot that you would have missed because you were listening to the podcast instead of watching on YouTube. So with that said, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Click on that subscribe button, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on a podcast. And I hope to see you back here soon in the next one. Take care.